Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for FMT's SAP by Design year-end close training. My name is Lucas Darling, and I'm an account executive here at FMT Consultants, and I'm joined by our very own SAP by Design practice manager, Ken Erb.
Hey, guys.
For those of you who aren't familiar with FMT, I'd like to just take a few moments to give you a brief introduction of our company. Here at FMT, we have successfully completed over 1,000 projects. We've been in business since 1995, and since then have become Southern California's leading provider of integrated solutions and currently have over 285 clients, both in the U.S. and Canada. Our team has grown to over 80 team members located both in northern San Diego as well as Los Angeles. At FMT, we pride ourselves on our 5 core values, which we like to hold ourselves to every day. They are integrity, service excellence, collaboration, innovation, and passion. With the combination of talent, experience, and methodology, we are fully dedicated to the success of your company. We offer a wide array of services pertaining to ERP, CRM, SharePoint, BI, and Office 365. In addition to having extremely experienced consultants, we also have a dedicated help desk that offers ongoing training and support once projects are completed. Here are just a few of the clients we get the privilege to work with on a daily basis. You should have received the By Design year-end training blog via email, but if you did not, I'll put it in the link in the chat box below. Now I'm going to hand it over to Ken, but before I do, if at any point during the presentation you have a question, feel free to type them into the comment box. We'll be monitoring it during the entire presentation, and we will answer them at the end. Thank you. Ken?
All right, hey guys, I'm Ken Erb. I'm the practice manager here for the SAP by Design practice here at FMT. Today, you'll see the agenda up on the screen here. This is basically kind of what I'm going to be going through today. First and foremost, today's presentation really is on your fiscal year-end process closing in by Design. In order to do that, I'm going to walk through kind of period-end closing at a high level, kind of an overview, just so that we are on a full understanding of what a period-end close is and what the difference is between the period-end close and a fiscal year-end close. I'm then going to go into detail on kind of the year-end closing explained piece, where I kind of explain all of the journal entries that are happening for every step that we take in closing out the fiscal year. And then I'm going to jump into the system and show you guys step by step how we go to do, how we create a new fiscal period, and then how we go about closing out using the carry forward process. And then after that, Lucas and I here will go through the questions, if any, that you guys drop in there into the go-to meeting, and we'll take it from there. So the first piece here is really just kind of explaining the period-end closing process, and then we'll get into kind of the description of what's the difference between period-end closing and fiscal year. For this, I'm just going to show you some screenshots, and we're going to go through this at a high level. I'll explain it, and then we'll talk about some of the tasks that go into the closing cockpit of SAP by Design. So the first step here, the first thing that you're going to see is the screenshots here laid out for step 1. So step 1 is really going in. This is how you initiate your period-end closing. You would go into the General Ledger Work Center, you would go into your closing cockpit, and you would go into closing relevant tasks. The second screenshot is showing you just one example of some of the closing relevant tasks that you're going to see. This area can be filled up. It could be 10 entries or it could be 200 entries, and this completely depends on your system. It completely depends on what kind of activities we're going to have to complete before the period is closed, and these things can vary from a lot of different things. Source documents can be unposted documents because you're trying to post something in a closed period. There could be valuation issues on transactions in the system where maybe valuation wasn't maintained for specific items. Sales or service documents might have issues related to them, and pushing products through the system and creating journal entries for inventory movements. Inventory movements in general, the system does kind of have its own method of moving inventory, especially on service documents, that you might run into some issues there. In this closing relevant tasks area is where you would see all of those accounting relevant issues that need to be resolved before you can close the period. So this is your first stepping stone from a period closure standpoint, where you would need to go through from an accounting standpoint and close out any open issues. The third step right here is really is the source document. So this is the while the relevant tasks gives you kind of a open, detailed description on what items you need to address at a high level, the source document is actually going to show you individual documents as it pertains to these different items. And you can see a couple of these in the screenshot are customer project expenses that need to be cleared out, and then time entries are another one. This is where you would see all your valuation errors also. And then the fourth step here is really the closing cockpit. You want to go in and create your period end close. So the closing cockpit is consistent of having a period end close for every period that you want to close for every company for every set of books. So when you look at the screenshot 5 here, you're seeing that when you create a new period end close, you have to identify the company, the set of books. You might have multiple sets of books. You might have your GAAP set of books, your IFRS set of books. You might have a consolidation set of books. This process needs to happen for each one of those individually. You need to choose the fiscal year that it's associated with and the period that you're closing. And then the last 2 options there for employee and close by period are optional. Now the next step here is once you've created your period end close, it's going to open up your closing activities list. So this is specific to the period that you're closing, what you've just created. And then within this list, you can add and remove anything in this list as it pertains to your closing activities for your company. The system generates a lot of them just based on whatever has been scoped in or fine-tuned into your system. So you're going to find that depending on your configuration, this list will change. You will also find items in here that you might not use. So for example, if you don't do reoccurring journal entry vouchers, you can remove that item from here. GRIR clearing is typically almost always done. Depreciation runs if you're using fixed assets. Revenue recognition if you're using contracts and project module in the system. These are all closing tasks that you would want to keep in your system. And you can see that they're differentiated by the activity type, manual activity versus a mass data run. The mass data runs are runs that happen in the system in the background that are initiated by the user and have different functions, obviously, GIR clearing, depreciation, revenue recognition, all different components of the system. In addition to that, there's a lot of other ones that you may or may not use. Some of those are things like cost distribution, overhead absorption, foreign currency exchange remeasurements. There's a lot of different ones in the system, and again, they will only show up in your closing cockpit if you have them scoped into your system. This list is completely at your leisure, so you can remove items, add items to this. You can add manual activities to it that pertain to your closing process, and obviously remove anything that you don't use. So that's the screenshot 6. Screenshot 7 shows you how you would mark those things as not relevant to remove them from your list. And then screenshot 8 is showing you how to insert manual activities. And 9 is what actually goes into a manual activity, creating a due date, describing what the step is, who's responsible for it, who the processor is. These are things that will drive workflow in your system once you create those activities as closing tasks. The last really thing that happens in the period end close is you have the ability to use these as a template. So once you've created and gone through all of your activities from a closing standpoint, really the last piece here is using process control, which we're going to see in a little bit once I jump into the system, and closing out your period. So once you're done with that and you go into, say for example, that was the first time you've ever done it and you want to do it again, so your next period you're closing, you can create your period end close with reference. That gives you the ability to take the activities list that you used previously and reuse it. That obviously makes it a lot easier for you, so you're not adding in new tasks every single time you're closing. Just makes it a lot more easy to do all of your period closings after the first. Okay, so now to get in kind of what we're talking about here, we've recapped kind of what the period close is, and I'm going to show you the screen where you're going to see all of the open and close periods here in a minute. But at a high level, I'd like to describe kind of what the year-end close does in general and by design from a journal entry standpoint, what the activities are actually doing when we start talking about the carry-forward process as it pertains to the first and second steps there. And then just kind of give you a visual here in these figures A and B that show you what the journal entry is, what's actually happening there. So before we jump into the system, I'll explain it. And what happens is there's really 2 steps that go into the carry forward process. There's ultimately probably 4 steps that go into the full year-end close process, but the actual functions that you use in the system are the balance carry forward and then your transfer to opening balances and retained earnings. So the first step here is the carry forward, and that step creates all the journal entries to close out the existing financial year and allow the preparation for financial statements. So what you're seeing here is really there's 3 journal entries that really happen, or 3 groups of journal entries that really happen during this carry forward process. So the first one you'll see here is denoted in figure A and you'll see the circled 1 there. That's the first step, and then you'll see the circled 2 in figure A also, and then down in figure B you'll see the circled 3. Those represent the different steps here. So step 1 is really closing all of the account balances of your balance sheet in your old fiscal year. So if you take a look at those first 2 steps, it's really just showing the closing of the balances of your balance sheet. The beige, just a prerequisite here too, so those beige T accounts that you see there, those represent what are called basically the closing accounts, and they always start, or at least by default, always in by design start with a 9. The actual GL accounts start with a 9. So those are always used for your fiscal year closing. So you'll see your closing balances from your balance sheet for step 1, and then your entry 2 is carrying the balances from your balance sheet to the new fiscal year. So that's what you would see in that step 2 there, creating your opening balances. And then your entry 3 really is taking the cumulative balance of your profit and loss accounts and transferring them into what's called an income summary account. That income summary account is not a typical account. It's kind of an interim area for retained earnings in the system, which we'll see in the next step here. So really the next part is, and these are 2 different functions in the system, you have to create a run for your initial carry forward, and then there's a separate one for opening balances and retained earnings. But this right here is a snapshot of the first step showing all the journal entries, or at least examples of some of the journal entries that will happen. You can see this, and we will see this once I start stepping through the process. When I go into the system, there is an area for us to display all of the postings that happen, and it kind of breaks them down for you. This is just a screenshot showing you some of the journal entries that happen during that process. Now there's the second piece of this. So this is about your balance carry forward. This is really the part where you have your opening balances are generated and your retained earnings are created in your new fiscal period. One thing that I didn't mention was obviously in order to initiate this process, which I'll show you in the system, you do have to create your new fiscal period, your new fiscal year. So in order to even begin this process, you have to have, for example, 2015, all of your periods closed up until December. And then you want to change your process control on those for only closing entries. And then you have to create your new fiscal year, so that way during this process it can make the journal entries from the old period to the new period. So in this second step here is really where that's happening. So the first entry really is, so this idea of your income summary account, moving that into your retained earnings. So what you see in the first step there is kind of a summary of that, moving that income summary to your retained earnings. And then the second piece there is the second and third show the clearing out of your income summary account and transfer that all into your opening balances. So at a high level, that's just kind of what that shows. And then also in figure B, all of the postings that are associated with it. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to pop into the system here, and we're going to actually walk through a closing of a fiscal year. So I'm here in our demo system, and where I'm going to start out is the general ledger. So I've gone in this instance to make sure that the year of 2015, we're going to use 2015 because it's easier, and I know that all of the GRIR and depreciation runs have been run, so I can successfully close a fiscal year. So the first thing that we're going to look at here is the general ledger. If I'll go into this work center, there's a couple of different areas that we're going to move around in here. But the first piece that I want to take a look at is this open and closed periods area. Once I go in here, what we're going to see is a list of all open and closed periods, and we can obviously filter this list down to what we want to see. So one thing that I like to filter on here is not blocked periods. If I type in a 1 and filter this list, it's going to show me for my companies and all of my sets of books and companies what periods are not currently blocked. And you can see in this example, the IFRS set of books that I have here, I've already closed the 2015 fiscal year, and all I see open is January through December for 2016. So that set of books has been closed. What we're going to be focusing on today is the U.S. GAAP set of books, and you'll see here, if I scroll down, that I still have 2015 open, and it's open for operational postings and profit and loss calculations. So what I want to do here is I need to make sure that this last entry here, so profit and loss calculations of retained earnings, is available for my last posting. And then for your first posting allowed, this can be a couple of different things. So depending on what state you are in this process, so if I've closed out all my periods, which I have in this scenario, I want to make sure that I actually only want to allow closing balances now. If I still had to close out previous periods, I would make sure I would allow for some closing entries to happen. But in this case, I just want to do the 990 entry to the 991, because in this case, I'm just doing my fiscal year end. So at that point, I'm just going to save this. Let the system save these entries. So now what this basically is saying, I have a little bit of process control in place now. That means for 2015, December of 2015, or before, the system will not allow any postings whatsoever unless they are associated with my closing balances and transferring my profit and loss to retained earnings to the new year. So now that I've done that, the second piece here I need to make sure of is that I need to make sure that the fiscal year 2016 is open. In this case, I know it is, but if I want to check that, I can go to General Ledger, Master Data, Set of Books, and Assigned Companies, and it's going to show us this area here. So this is going to show us all of our companies with the different sets of books that are associated with them, and I can take a look at them by going in and editing the fiscal year. Once I'm in the screen, you're going to see all of the previously blocked fiscal years or closed out fiscal years, and it's going to show you in the carry forward post and the results posted. This is basically the two steps that we're doing, the carry forward process and then the opening balances. So this is a checkbox that just kind of shows you what has been done in a previous period. I can see that 2014 has been completely closed out. That fiscal period is closed. And at this point, this is where it's good information to know that in ByDesign, you are only allowed to have, at any given time, 3 fiscal periods open at a time. So you can keep your 2015, 2016, and 2017 financial years open, but you certainly want to block using process control any operational postings that would happen. And in just a second here, I'll explain exactly what the difference is between the 2 carry forward steps and the ability to generate financial statements at the end of the year before you actually do your carry forward balance. And that kind of takes effect here because we don't necessarily have to close this period for the system to consider it closed in terms of posting. So we'll walk through that in a second. But in this instance, this is where you would come to check to make sure that you have a new fiscal period open. Otherwise, the subsequent steps here would not be able to take place. You would get error messages telling you that you need a period open. So in this instance, we're going to revisit this when we actually close out the 2015 year, but I'm going to close out this area. And now once I've done that, so now those are kind of the 2 prerequisites that I would make sure of. All of my periods are closed. I've made sure that my December period is open for closing balances and profit and loss transfer to retained earnings. I've checked to make sure that my fiscal year 2016 is open. And then obviously for you guys, you want to make sure that your 2016 is closed for operation for all of those postings and your 2017 fiscal year is open. But in this scenario, we're going to do with last year. Okay, so now once I've done that, the next step here is I'm actually going to do my carry forward. So the next thing that we're going to do is go into General Ledger, and we're going to go into, one second here. Carry forward balances. It's under periodic tasks. So this is the next step in our work through here for closing out your fiscal year. Once I get in here, you're going to see a list of all of our previous what they call runs. So these are technically mass data runs in the system for your balance carry forward, and there's 2 types. Like I had mentioned before, there's really 2 steps. Your first step is your closing balances. Your second step is your profit and loss transfer over into retained earnings. So the first step here is if we go to new, there's a carry forward run. So I'm going to create that carry forward run. I'm going to name this something that, a naming convention that you will use for your fiscal year closing. So I'll call this Micah Company 2015 GAAP closing. You can name this anything you want. It's always best practice to run this as a test first. What this is going to do is it's going to give you your display log, and it's going to tell you if you're going to run into any issues. Things that would come up during this are maybe you haven't run revenue recognition, maybe you haven't run depreciation on your fixed assets, maybe GIR hasn't been run. Not all of those will give you error messages, but the ones that are keeping you from closing your books are fixed asset depreciation certainly needs to be run. So there's a number of different things in the system that you would have in your closing cockpit that will need to be run before this happens. Running the test is an easy way for you to manage that and understand what you need to do or what you haven't done before you get to this point. In this instance, I'm pretty confident that we don't need to do a test run. So I'm going to choose my company, my Almaca company. I'm going to choose my set of books. I want to do the GAAP set of books. This is where we choose the different steps. So your step one is your carry forward accounts. Your second step is calculating and carry forward profit and loss. So we're going to choose step one, and I'm going to choose my year. So we're doing 2015 in this instance. Once I've done that, I can either schedule this, so I can set this up to be a run, and I can schedule it, or I can go ahead and start it now, which I'm going to do. This will take a second. So like I mentioned, there is two steps to this. I have to do my carry forward, and then I have to do my profit and loss transfer. This will run. It's going to create it, and it's going to give me a display log, and we're going to take a look at that because it's going to show us the, like the screenshots that I'd shown you before, it's going to show us all the journal entries that are associated with it. So once this finishes, we'll take a look at that log real quick. I'll kind of walk through each one of those areas. We can see that the entry was successfully saved, finished without any errors. But if I click on the display log, we can also get to this back from the other screen. I can see that there was no errors. This processing status is green. And then if I take a look at the postings area, this is going to show you all of the different postings. The easiest way to probably look at this is you can break it down by your closing balances, your opening balances, your profit and loss accounts, but you can also look at the journal entries that are created. And this is kind of a cumulative look at all of the journal entries that are created in this instance. So you can see that it's going to show us all of our balance sheet accounts that are being touched here. It's going to show us all of the closing balances that are generating into our opening balances. So in this, we can close this out. We can revisit this at any point in time, but that's kind of just the meat and potatoes of what's actually going on in this mass data run. Now that that's successfully run, at this point in time, I can actually run financial statements. So all of my closing balances have been created. I can go in and I can create financial statements for my year-end closing for 2015. The next step here is obviously to generate your opening balances and retained earnings. So I would not be able to post in my new period, or at least I wouldn't have my retained, I wouldn't be able to see if I had closed my January period in 2016 until I do this next function here. I would not be able to see financials for that period. So the next step here would be to create a new carry forward. And again, these are two steps that don't need to happen subsequent to each other. It doesn't have to happen immediately. There can be a period of time here. You are allowed to make postings in a period previous or prior to this step. So sometimes it does behoove companies to not necessarily do the finish the carry forward too early. So just keep that in mind. So I'll call this Almaca. And we'll call this 2015 GAAP opening balances. And again, you can call this whatever you want. I'm not going to run the test. I'm going to choose the same company. The only thing I'm really doing different here is maybe naming it differently. Same set of books. Now I'm choosing my second step, choosing my same year. I'm going to start this. Now, as we let this run, so the subsequent steps to this are obviously, we'll go back, we'll take a look at the display log here, we'll take a look at the GL entries that are associated with this. There's obviously, sometimes there is reason to go back after the fact and reverse this, so we can talk about what the reversal looks like and what that actually means. But we'll take a look at the display log here. So the process in all is actually very simple. It's very straightforward. As anybody who knows by design, it does not, just because it's very few steps, does not mean it's a slow process, a quick process. You do run into quite a few things with your period closing and your fiscal year closing as it pertains to source documents, depreciation, fixed assets, depreciation run, and revenue recognition. So we can touch on those things a little bit as it pertains to some errors that we've come across, just typical, some tips that we would recommend for the fiscal year closing, some things you might want to do prerequisite to that. But if we take a look here, so now I've run this, I can see that it successfully ran. If I take a look at the postings, you'll see now, here's your accounts that start with 9, your balance sheet closing account. Your retained earnings is going into your new account. And if I take a look at all of the entries, you'll see that this one is far less. This is simply your opening balances and retained earnings going into your new fiscal period. So a lot less activity going on here, but this is required for you to get accurate financial statements in your new fiscal year. Okay, so now if we take a look at some of these, you're going to run into issues. So some of these, I don't think I have one in here that's a great example, but I will talk through it. So not only in your period end closing, but in your fiscal year end closing, you will run into error messages that pertain to depreciation or that pertain to source documents that have not been posted. So I want to show you that area. If you go into your audit work center, you'll see that there's an area in here called source documents under general ledger. So this is an area that becomes a pretty big focus for most companies on SAP by design as it pertains to kind of clearing out all of these documents. Right now we're not seeing any in here, but if I go into the general ledger work center and I take a look at closing relevant tasks, you'll see a couple of things in here. So these are ones that have to do with check deposits that are overdue that require confirmation. So one of the steps here that you would make sure that you would go through is hitting either this little button right here to go into open details, and this would show you all of the detail associated with whatever GL posting is being held up. In this instance, it's not a GL posting that's being held up, rather a document in the system. If you open details, it's going to open up this screen. And in this screen, it's going to give you a little description of kind of what's going on here. It's going to tell you the transferred check deposit has not been credited to your bank account contact. And then basically, if you click on details, it's going to tell you what document is actually being afflicted. So in this instance, it'll open up our check deposit number 16. And from here, I can open up the document and make any changes that I need to from here. Where this becomes the most important is because things like project expenses and valuation issues in the system can be sometimes hard to troubleshoot. So what will happen is in your unposted documents, I don't have a great example built in here because the system is so clean. I might actually have one in my development system. 1 second here. I actually probably do have one in my development system. So I'm going to pop that open real quick. And while this loads, so one of the things that I'm going to show you right now is clearing out some of these pieces for your closing as it pertains to the master data that's associated with them, as it pertains to posting within a different period. So there's obviously issues with documents that are trying to post in previous periods. I'll show you how to walk through and step through setting process control for those periods. That's important to know if you don't already. So right now what I can do is really quickly show you that. Under General Ledger, if I go into Audit, or actually I'm sorry, under General Ledger, if I take a look at my open and closed periods area under Common Tasks. So first and foremost, if a period is closed, you would have to open that period. So this is the kind of, there's two levels of process control. This is the highest level. So if you have a period closed, where if I scroll down in this list, you'll see that I have December of 2015 for my IFRS books is closed. In this instance, if I needed to go back and post something there, we'll walk through that in a minute from a fiscal year closing, how we go back and reverse that and add those postings. But let's say, for example, this is more of a my set of books that I have open for GAAP. I want to go back and post in, let's go down to our GAAP set of books and I'll show you. So if I were to go back here and I wanted to, say for example, I have like a supplier invoice or a project expense that is trying to post in November and I can't post it, this would be the first reason why I wouldn't be able to post it, because that period has been closed and blocked. The second piece to that would be, even if I unblock this and I opened the period, the second piece here would be, what am I allowed to post in this? So in this instance, it's showing operational postings, and that's exactly what that is. So a supplier invoice or a project expense would fall into that category. So right now, if I opened this period, I would be able to go back and post into that period anything that I need to. And then you can kind of do this from a spectrum. So I can do my operational postings, but in this instance, my last step allowed is operational postings also. So I actually wouldn't be able to post closing. I wouldn't be able to post anything for closing entries in here because that's not set. I would have to change that. So it's kind of a starting point and an ending point, how far you can go with your postings. But in this instance, if I open this up for operational postings, this would allow me to post operational project expenses in this period. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to save and close this. So that's for 2015 November. The second piece to it would be process control. So if I go into, let's see here, I need to set process control. It's actually under General Ledger. It's under companies. So if you go to General Ledger under master data companies, you'll see both of my companies sitting here, and I have this option to choose set process control. So for Almica, I can choose set process control. And this is where you have a lot of granularity into what you can block for postings. So as it shows right now, I can see that I have all postings allowed, and it tells me what period they're allowed for. I can drop in new entries here, and I can choose that I want to not block, and I can choose what kind of posting I want for that period. So this is the way that I can go in and say, okay, well, I want to not block, or I can block certain entries that I want to happen. And here's the list you can choose from a customer invoice, supplier invoice, time and expenses, time and services, expenses, anything really, any really cost object that sits in the system that would hit a project or cost center from a cost standpoint. So I can choose all, and then you can say entry possible, and from when I can post that, what are the posting dates that are allowed. So when is my entry possible, I can drop that date in, and then I can choose the range of time that I want those postings to be available. So you get a lot of granularity here in your set process control as it pertains to GL postings in the system. So in your closing process, whether it's a period end close or a fiscal year end close, this is a way that will allow you to stage your closing process for certain documents in the system as it might pertain to your timeline. So people use this in a lot of different ways. Some people don't use it at all. So it completely depends on how you want to manage your closing process. Now, let me pop back over to my development system. Okay, so now I'm in my dev system, and I want to take a look here to see if I can find an example of maybe like a valuation. So if I go into the Audit Work Center and I take a look at source documents, in this system there's a lot more transactional data, so I know that there's more than likely there are a bunch of entries in here, in which there are. So the starting point for this, and this completely most of the time, most of these entries really depend on posting date, and then in addition to that depend on master data. So in a lot of instances there's either pricing missing from a document in the system, or there's valuation missing, or maybe there's a link to a contract that's missing, and that's what you're going to see here. It's going to tell you what the source document type that's having an issue, and everything that's sitting in this list is a document in the system that was trying to make a journal entry posting, but was stopped due to some sort of an error message. So if I take a look at this sales order entry, and I scroll down, it's going to tell me that it tried to reference a contract 102, and it was not found. So in some of these instances, there are issues that maybe there's some sort of a communication in the background of SAP that's getting caught, and those, for the most part, need to be brought up as an incident to SAP, and they will fix them if they haven't already. So some of these are process communication errors that will show up to SAP, which they clear them out on a regular basis, so you will actually see some of these disappear automatically. If they're not, and they don't get taken care of during you're reaching your close process and you need these to be cleared out, this is something that you might actually need to reach out to SAP for directly. Outside of that, though, there are a lot of other messages that you might see in here. And like for this instance, there's an error message here saying that the fiscal year for 2016 missing for company Almica. This entry probably was created before that fiscal year was even available. So in this instance, you can come in and choose action, and you can choose to post this business transaction. What this does is it tries to repost this document with the same exact information that it originally tried to, and you would use this whenever you fixed the problem, fixed the error message, fixed whatever needed to be corrected in the system, and you just want to rerun the transaction. And then you can also choose to post this in another period. So what this gives you the option to do is choose when you want this document to actually post. This would obviously be useful for project expenses or just cost items in general, that if you've closed out the previous period and you're not comfortable going back and opening it up, you can change this to post in a more current period. You can also choose the different closing step, and where that would be important is like we had seen when you open and close periods, you can change that range in which you have closing steps. Sometimes these things are trying to post under operational postings automatically, and then we might want to change that date and change this to a closing entry so we can get this done and closed out without having to go back and change any sort of process control from a period standpoint. That gives you an option there to do that. That's just an easier way to manage these postings without having to go back and reinvent the wheel as it pertains to closing your periods. So you'll see these on occasion, and they do need to be cleared out at your period end closing to make sure that all of your costs are being accounted for so that revenue recognition runs properly. And really that's what this area is used for. But this is typically the area that we find most of the period end closings having issues or anything leading into your fiscal year end closing, is making sure that all of this stuff is cleaned up. Okay, so I've walked through all of the fiscal year steps there. And at this point, I've kind of given you an overview of the period end closing. I've shown you some of the areas that you will run into unposted source documents, and then walked through the very short steps that go into actually closing your fiscal year, creating a new one and closing it. Lucas, is there any questions that came through?
There is. Here's one right here. is it possible to open prior closed periods to make adjusting entries?
Certainly. So that's something that we can take a look at right now. So from a period standpoint, that's actually really easy to do. If we take a look at the system here, and I go into General Ledger and open and close periods, this is something that we touched on briefly before. If we go into the open and close periods and I take a look at what period I want to, it's as simple as coming back here and opening this up and changing the allowed steps for what kind of postings you want to happen. And we kind of walked through those unposted documents and how you can manipulate what kind of postings they are in order to clear those out. So in addition to that, the next question would be, from a period closing standpoint, can I go back and open a fiscal year and post to it? So yes, you can. Obviously, that's not something that will probably happen very often once you finish your closing process, but you certainly can. So that's why there's those two different steps for the carry forward process. So if I go back into General Ledger and I take a look at our set of books, or actually if I take a look at our balance carry forward, this is going to show all of our runs, and this is why this is important, is that we can come back and take a look at all of these runs that I've already created in the system. And then I can see here, this is the last one I ran. Here's my Almica opening balances. If I needed to come back at this point in time, the actual last step for this closing process would be under General Ledger, Master Data, Set of Books, and Assigned Companies. So right now, at this point, so far, I've created my opening balances for 2016. My fiscal period technically is still open. So if I go into Master Data and Set of Books for Assigned Companies, I would take a look at the Set of Books gap that I've been working from. I would edit the fiscal years. And I would see that my 2015, my carry forward balances have been completed. My results have been posted, but I am still not blocked here. So in this case, I would close this financial year, this fiscal year, I'm sorry. And this is a great item here. So what this is saying is that my period, my last December period has not been closed, so it's not allowing me to close my fiscal year here. So I'd have to go back and close December before I can actually close this fiscal year. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And I would do that by going to General Ledger, open and close periods. And then I want to take a look at my gap set of books. And I'll see that December here, I actually have both of these. I can actually shift-click these and close both of them at the same time. Then you can see now that they're both blocked. I save and close. Now if I go back to General Ledger, Master Data, which I'm already here, edit fiscal year, close fiscal year, save. Now it's blocked. So now if I wanted to go back and make entries in that year, so this would completely close that period, that fiscal year out of 2015. I can no longer go back there and make any entries whatsoever. My opening balances have been carried over. So now at this point I would say, okay, well I want to reopen this fiscal year. It'll allow me to reopen it, save and close. And then I would go to General Ledger and go back to my carry forward. And then I'm going to take a look at this opening balances run that I ran. So this is the last run that I ran to carry over my opening balances. In this instance, I would want to reverse this. And it's going to bring in all of the same information. Maybe I want to rename this as a reversal. And I would start now. This is basically going back and just reversing all of the journal entries that were associated with my retained earnings and opening balances. And this would get me exactly back in the stage of where I had already done my closing balances, and I would be able to open up my December or any other period for that matter and make adjusting entries. And then we would just run through the same exact process going back forward, where I'd have to rerun our second step for our fiscal year end, and then I would close out my fiscal year. And in this instance, it's saying this is actually pretty good. It's giving us a display log here. It says that it ran, and then we have an error message. And then you would come in here and you can take a look at those messages. And this right here is telling us that my period 12 for my fiscal year 20 is closed. So it's actually telling me that even though I opened up my fiscal year, my last period, period 12, is not open, so it's not allowing me to run this. So since that's the case, I'd have to go back in, open up December to allow for transactions, and that's kind of where you can see those different levels of process control. It really starts at the fiscal year closing, the period closing, and then setting process control in that granular area where you could see we could choose what kind of postings are coming through. But that's how you would go back and reverse these. With this error message, obviously, we don't need to go back and open that period and rerun it. It's just the one message that we got there. Anything else, Lucas?
No, I think that wraps it about up. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any other questions, I'll be following up with all the attendees, so feel free to ask me at that time. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and we hope to see you at our future events. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.